Good. Apologies about that, brother.
It's all good.
But yeah, man, I was telling everybody that I just want to make sure that everybody has access, and not everybody does have access, across the world for sure. But even, locally, to making sure that everybody has access to. And again, I refer to you as a professional. I feel like you're, very knowledgeable. But again, as I always say, we always have room to grow, right? We don't have all the answers. Um, but we want to make sure that not only local hoops kids, but just the community has access to people who have experience working not only racism themselves, but working people out of racism, working people through understanding, and figuring out kind of where a lot of this stuff came from, right? Because that's in my did you hear that last part?
Say it one more time.
I was saying working people kind of through understanding and where a lot of this stuff came from, because I feel like that's a huge part of the battle.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to kind of get started today with, one of the main topics is why African American men feel uncomfortable or feel it's not acceptable showing emotion. And, you see this kind of negative connotation like, oh, well, that's soft to show emotion. You got to be hard. You got to be this. You got to be that. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. So getting people to really tap into where that came from, and also how to handle those feelings when they do come about, how to handle the peer pressure that comes with that, and kind of the social connotations and that whether they be negative or positive, and how we should be guiding our youth and our adults really in terms of how to have those conversations.
Yeah. So that's a very critical question for us, Kel.
For
You
sure.
know, as we've talked about, we're living in a time right now with, of course, with the pandemic, everything that is happening in our country around racism and the murder of George Floyd. We're given the opportunity to ask a lot of important questions of the society and of ourselves. And the question you're asking is a question that you and I have talked a lot about. And, it's important for us to have this discussion, especially with the young people that we work with, let alone everybody else that's tuning in for this conversation.
Right.
So as you started off talking about racism. And so as I think about that question, I think about, who were we prior to us coming to America?
Mm-hmm.
When we were taken from Africa, we came here as whole human beings in touch with the whole expression of what it meant to be human being, especially our emotional expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we think about what we went through when we got here, so we go back to slavery, and we think about the degradation and dehumanization, specifically, the fact that violence can be done to us at whim. And if we showed any emotional expression, natural expression in response to that violence, that could be the end of our lives.
Right.
The women in our life could be raped, could be the family members in our life could be killed. Our children could be raped. Our children could be killed. Our children could be sent off to different parts of the country, right? At the whims of the people who were holding us, white people that were holding us in slavery.
Right or
and
wrong.
So, right or wrong, right? So as we think about that, we had to begin to swallow our emotional expression in the face of all that dehumanization, oppression, and degradation for us to survive.
Right.
And as we begin to swallow our emotional expression, that started to get passed down multi-generationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we think about it. I was listening to Dave Chappelle last night, and he said something profound. He talked about the fact that, George Floyd, when he was being killed, was crying out for his mother who had passed away.
Right.
And Dave Chappelle was talking about, someone in his family who was dying had called out for their grandmother who was a slave.
Right.
And so you think about the fact that we are not far removed from slavery, right? And so that multi-generational trauma from that had an impact on our emotional expression is still very much with us. And it wasn't just slavery, because when slavery stopped, the oppression didn't end. We came out of slavery and went right back into a slavery by another name. Right. So we had the black codes, we had sharecropping, we had Jim Crow, we had lynching, right? Then even after the civil rights movement, now we have mass incarceration, police brutality. So we have all these external forces that are assaulting our emotional health, our emotional state of being. And a trauma response has been to swallow and shut down our emotions for safety and for survival. But there's a cost, and I know we're going to talk about that.
Right. For sure. It's interesting that you say that from a male standpoint. I have a question for you, and at any point, obviously, feel free to direct questions my way, as I want this to be a two-way conversation. But you said that we were taught, and when reaching back to slavery days, we were taught to suppress emotion because there were severe, dire consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes male and female.
Mm-hmm.
I would make the argument, and maybe I'm off on this, maybe not, but I feel that Black women have made further progress in showing and being comfortable in their emotions than Black men have, even though Black women were not allowed to show emotions either because there was dire consequences or, disrespect or not obeying orders, right? Why do you feel that is?
I think it impacted all of us, right?
Right.
Everything we talked about. I think there's been a specific impact in terms of men, in terms of the overall socialization that we get as men. So if we just took us out of the historical context of slavery and everything we've been talking about, and think about just the messages we get as men from the time we're little. So think about in the media that men aren't supposed to cry. Everything you were talking about earlier, if you cry and show feelings, that you're soft, that we're supposed to really show a very limited range of emotions. Anger, right? Anger, maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Love and tenderness only behind closed doors. We're not supposed to show that in front of our boys or anything like that, right?
Exactly.
And so there's messages that we're getting separate from the experience of racism as men that are different than the messages that all women are getting, right?
Sure.
And then there's specific messages around Black men. So, one of the things I was talking with Mahdi about, we were laughing about Sanford and Son and how much we love Sanford and Son. But the truth is that is the only thing that we were able to see of Black people in our media, right? Then a little bit later, we might see Huggy Bear on Starsky and Hutch or George Jefferson or, Good Times, right? So we saw very limited expressions of masculinity in the mass media. And the ones that we saw reinforce us shutting down our emotional expression.
For sure.
And then, of course, we had the men in our lives who were experiencing all the stuff, all the multi-generational messages that we talked about earlier that were providing real life examples for us, right? So you put all that together, and so much of that, again, because I don't want to have this conversation from a place of deficit within us, right? From a place of us being able to recognize the context in which we are expressing our emotions, and also being able to have an opportunity to talk about how we outgrow this stuff as well.
Right. How to move forward. That's what it is. By no means any of this stuff a pity party. I mean, this is a situation to where it's, getting an understanding in terms of, so every situation is getting an understanding in terms of how to move forward. What are conversations that you've had? Because I've experienced it personally, and it also kind of, there's different personalities, right? That every racial background has, right? You have your extroverts, your introverts, you have your more dominant personalities, all that type of stuff like that. Especially for, the quote unquote alpha males, that a lot of Black people also, kind of get thrown into that demographic, even though that may not be the case at all. How important is it to be in touch with how do you get young men? I think it gets more, as you get older, it gets easier for you to kind of step into yourself, be confident in yourself. But when you're younger, there's so much social and environmental pressures on you that you may not feel comfortable, being emotional, or you feel that you need to hide that. What type of messages are we giving, and should we be giving, as leaders of the community, as parents, as mentors, and whatever, role that we're playing? What type of message besides, it's okay to be emotional? How do we go past that? How do we tell them this is why it's okay, and not necessarily why it's happening, but why it's okay to be true with your emotions and true to yourself and understand those emotions?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, Kel, is we have to model the example, right?
Right.
And so as leaders, people have been put in positions to lead, right? It's not so much what we say as what we do. And so how do we start to show the full span of our emotional expression to the young men, right? And as we show that to them, that shows them, because they look up to us. So many of them look up to us. So that in turn gives them permission to show full expression of their emotions, right? And I think we need to be able to have a different level of conversation with our young people, young men as well. Because when I think about all the years in which I swallowed my emotions, right? That led to alcoholism for me. So I drank to numb out, to not feel, gamble, womanizing, smoking weed, all kinds of stuff, right? And then helping our young people to learn from our examples of the cost of that, right? What was the cost of that? I mean, that destroyed relationships, right? I mean, I almost died going into the hospital, man. I mean, so much gets lost when we're not able to really express ourselves. So more than anything else, we need to lead by example. And then that means we need to start having some real critical conversations with ourselves and some honest, authentic conversations with ourselves. How am I really showing up, right? And, you know, one of the things I love about our relationship is that we've been able to go, you know, talking about, you know, what it was like for us growing up, sharing a lot of emotional, vulnerable stuff. And so for me and you, I feel like we have an opportunity to model that to other people. You know, and so, Kel, I want to ask a question for you. What, in terms of your emotional expression, right, and the different levels, steps that you've seen yourself take across your life, what was the number one thing that you've done recently that has really opened yourself up to express more of yourself emotionally?
So, I mean, I give a lot of that credit to you of really being educated in terms of what's kind of acceptable. I've been in a leadership role from my athletic days when I was playing competitively, and, you know, I still play somewhat competitively as well. But just I've been somewhat, and even in my peer groups, my social circles, I've been advanced, right? So, you know, friends would come to me, younger, just kids in general or whatever, even peers would just kind of ask me the advice. And even people that were older than me would still kind of, you know, come to me and come to my direction. So I always felt like I had to have the right answer, right? So I always felt like if someone came to me, I needed to be able to answer that question. I felt like I needed to be right. In the most sense, I didn't necessarily have a problem with saying I didn't know if there was something I genuinely didn't know. But it was hard for me once I had like a belief on certain things. It was hard for people to convince me otherwise, if that makes sense. Because I had that fear of kind of being wrong, or, you know, once you get to a certain quote unquote stature, you enjoy that people kind of look up to you, right? You're like, okay, I must to me that in everything that I had been shown, that said that I'm doing something right. Right. Like if people are kind of idolizing me or, you know, coming to me for advice, like, okay, well, I must know something. Right. So now having that made me be like, okay, well, I can't be wrong. Right. And I can't be wrong. I can't be weak. I can't be tired. I can't be sad. You know, I need to come with good energy all the time. Which some of that stuff is true. Like, I think that you should, you know, try to control, you know, what you can control and try to keep yourself in a happy state as much as you can. But the ideology that you're never going to have a bad day and you're never going to be sad and you need to suppress those feelings when they do come is dangerous, right? So one thing that has helped me through, you know, a myriad of stuff that we've gone through is really digging into, is taking a step back and not being reactionary. And what I mean by that is when I feel something, not automatically trying to figure out why it is and then suppress it and move on and fix it immediately. There's not always going to be a quick fix for how you're feeling, right? That doesn't allow you to react any way that you want to react, right? So that's something that has to really be thoroughly understood, right? So your emotions don't grant you to react any way that you want to, right? So if I'm having a bad day and the kids, you know, I'm having a bad day, I've got some whatever stuff going on outside, as soon as I step into an environment where other people are needing me, I still need to be my best for them, right? So I still need to just find that power from within, figure out what I need to do. But it's not acceptable because I've had a bad day. Maybe my mom passed away, someone close to me, whatever. You know, that's an understandable reason why you may be feeling that way. But it's not acceptable to react and lash out to other people because of that. But I've been taught that it's not even okay to feel that, right? So I've been trying to differentiate emotional react, because in the past I looked at emotional reactions and emotional feelings as the same thing when they're not. So I have tried to do a better job of stepping away and looking at things from a non-biased standpoint, right? Not thinking, and I never really had the feeling that people were out to get me or you know, that this was unfair. I understand that the life was kind of unfair, but I never really played. I know a lot of people that kind of play on that, right? Like, oh, you know, life is unfair, woe is me, that type of stuff. I never really had that big of an issue. I just kind of, and a part of that came from basketball. I just kind of figured out ways to get it done, right? Like I just, okay, this isn't fair, whatever. You know, I'm not getting calls. Let me go change some stuff up. But one of the biggest things that I've been proud of is parenting is a challenge. And, you know, Cindy and I are young parents and proud young parents, love my children to death, but 3 kids, 4 years and older and younger can be challenging. And, you know, Cindy and I have a lot of very real conversations. And one of the main reasons I married Cindy is that she was one of the first women ever to challenge me, right? And a lot of women that I dated before, I wouldn't accept any type of kind of, I would fight them every time they told me I was doing something wrong, instead of just really internalizing what they were saying. And, you know, when I met Cindy, it was just, you know, the same thing. I tried to fight her as well. But my mom was the first person to recognize that. And she was like, Cindy's good for you. I like Cindy. I'm like, what you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you'll figure it out. But we just have very real conversations about trying to control your reactions and your reactions, but accepting your emotions. And that was kind of a long-winded way of saying that, but accepting your emotions and controlling your reactions and making educated reactions that you're going to feel comfortable with the next day and the next week and the next month. So not justifying your reactions because you're emotional, right? So if you feel like you have to justify, well, I did that because I felt this way. That's not necessary. That doesn't mean the reaction is right. The emotion can be 100% right? But we are in full control of our reactions, right? And should be. So those are the biggest things, is making sure that, you know, if I'm busy or whatever, and, you know, I've got a bunch of stuff going on or whatever, and, you know, kids are in their purest form when they're younger, right? So KJ doesn't understand, or Kamani doesn't understand that I'm busy and I've got other stuff going on and I've got all this kind of pressures and I've got these things I need to do. If he wants my attention, he's just going to come up and ask for it, right? So, Daddy, what are you doing? Blah, blah, like, he'll come and jump off the walls and try to jump on my desk and, you know, all this stuff like that. And instead of reacting like, what are you doing, right? Instead of having that kind of reaction, understand the feeling first, understand the person that it's coming from, and then try to educate as best you can. Right. So those are a lot of kind of things that it really has to do with emotional reactions and controlling those.
Right. And so, Kelly, one of the things I heard you talk about, and it's something that we have to begin to deal with, you know, I'm talking exclusively to Black men, but all of us who are listening, is we have to deal with our ego, right? And so many of us have been confused about what the ego is. And so as you talked about, you know, wanting to be right in situations, caring about what other people think. So many of the reasons why we don't express our emotions as fully and as healthily as we need to is because we're so stuck into our ego and we're so concerned about what other people are going to think, right? And what we end up doing is losing. Our emotions are here to help guide us and to teach us, right? And because we're so locked into our ego, we get disconnected from our feelings and we miss so many of the lessons that we're supposed to learn, right? And you think about, when I think about what's happening in the world right now, right? And this opportunity that we're all given, this opportunity for us to be able to step back and understand that to the degree in which we continue to swallow and deny and stuff our feelings and our emotions, we're not going to have the range of expression that we need to be able to solve the problems that we're faced with, right?
100%.
Right. And so we have to begin to have some conversations about ego. We have to begin some conversations about the programming that we have received, both on a larger societal level, as well as the programming we might have received from our family, and begin to question those things that we just accept blindly, right? That we accept as normal. And because so many of us get on this track where we're just essentially on autopilot in our lives. And we're doing things that are damaging to the people around us, to our children, to our partners, to our family members, to our friends. And we're often doing things that are damaging to ourselves, right?
We don't even know.
Yeah. Often we don't.
That the most of the time, yeah. I mean, like, I had no idea that, like, when there were so many things that from yourself, my D, you know, other people, that it really started with you and my D, about kind of tapping into that. And, you know, tapping into breaking down. And my D had an interesting approach because he he would build you up first, right? So before there always has to be that trust factor before you listen to somebody, right? Most of the time anyway, for me, for sure. So, you know, he would talk to me and they would get to know you, whatever, because if you're trying to speak knowledge and life into somebody and they don't really know you and they don't trust you, if you say something that they don't really already know, it's good. They're going to naturally combat that. Even if they don't do it verbally, in their mind, it's going to be hard for them to accept that.
That's right.
Right. So when you break down, and I think that's something that really has to be taught to a lot of leaders, is that you have to break down a lot of, I would even almost call them invisible barriers, right? So you may not be able to see them right when you look at someone, but they're there. You know what I'm saying? So, and the only way you do that is you get to know people, right? So you have to really genuinely get to know someone before you tell them, you know, kind of how you feel. And you have to be very careful of, I guess my D never really told me what to do, right? He just kind of said, you know, you asked a question and here's my answer. So wanting them to do better, but not judging them and rushing them, because everyone has their own timeline, right? So you say, hey, man, tomorrow you got to fix this, man. You need to stop smoking tomorrow. You need to stop getting angry tomorrow. You need to stop doing this tomorrow. You need to stop feeling this, and putting a timeline on it, right?
That's right.
Telling them the importance of it and then helping them work through it on their own time.
That's right.
Right. And you can kind of recognize when people aren't really taking it seriously, or, you know, you feel like you can kind of give them slight pushes, but you push too hard, then people are just they're going to put pounds back and then they'll close the door. So,
yeah. You know, I'm so glad you brought Mahdi into the conversation. I mean, one of the things, I've learned so much from Mahdi as my spiritual teacher and my mentor, right? Big brother, everything, right?
Sure.
And one of the things, you know, for the sake of this conversation, you know, and there's probably a couple of things I'm going to talk about that I learned from Mahdi in this conversation, I have been talking about, is that showing up authentic and vulnerable. And so when I began my relationship with Mahdi through my coaching process with Mahdi, one of the things that helped me to really open up was the fact that Mahdi was open and vulnerable with his experiences. You know, as he was bringing the coaching process to me, he wasn't just on the mountaintop telling me what I need to do, but he was sharing nakedly things that he experienced in his life, right? But, you know, the things that he went through, and that allowed me to open up. And so I think the best approach for us as we're working with other people is to really share our process, our journey, right? And to always see people not who they're showing up as right now, but ultimately who they are. Because so many of us think we're just a product of all the things that we've experienced, but we're so much more than that. The truth is that we are infinite beings, right? We tend to see ourselves as mere human beings on this planet, but the truth is we are infinite beings. And really what this conversation and all the conversations that people are having around the country, that's really calling us to really step back into who we fundamentally are. And the truth is, Kel, for us to really outgrow all this stuff that we're talking about, racism, sexism, you know, shutting down our emotions, violence, all this stuff, it's going to require us to take that quantum leap into the next level of consciousness and really start getting back into who we fundamentally are, which again is infinite beings, right?
That's right. So one thing, and to kind of go back to your original question for me, is one thing I've got exponentially better at is being vulnerable. That's another thing. Vulnerable and vulnerable and emotional can be, you know, kind of very, very similar and synonymous, but being okay with being vulnerable and not really putting too much stock in terms of how people are viewing that, right? So not trying to get off the pedestal, and not even the pedestal of being right? But just the pedestal of always being upbeat, always being in a good mood, always being this, always being that, just being open with whatever happened in the past, embracing it, and then figuring out ways to move forward. And when you are vulnerable, like you said, with other people, I mean, I've taken this into several different aspects of my life, whether that's, you know, being the leader of coaches in local hoops, whether that's being the male leader in the family with talking to my boys. You know, it just changes your approach to things, and again breaks down another one of those barriers to where, yes, you know, even if it's an authoritative figure speaking to you, it's not speaking to you and making you feel like you did something that they haven't done before, right? So when my mentors in the past, looking back, I resonated and was listening on a deeper level when they were like, listen, man, I'm telling you this because I've done it before. Right. Like this was, you know, I've done, hey, trust, like, right. Like, if you're going through something, you're struggling through something, you want to hear from somebody who's done this before, not somebody who you feel is kind of on like a whole nother level with you because you can't relate to them. Mm-hmm. Right. So they're like, man, listen, I've done that before. Try it this way. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
I want to talk a little bit, make sure everybody's very clear on what the definition of an infinite being is. What is the definition of an infinite being?
So the fact that we have no end and no beginning. We are spiritual beings. Now we are soul beings that are connected to the collective God, if you will, universe. Many people have many different names. And so the truth is that even the bodies that you see us sitting here talking to you from right now, as Kelly, as Dustin, these are just temporary vessels to hold who we fundamentally are, which is soul beings, right?
Right.
And so the fact is that we have always been here, always will, and that we are connected to the greatest power in the universe. And we have all that within us to bring to our life and to this world together. And so all this oppression that we've been talking about, so much of this oppression was designed to keep us from tapping into that inherent power that we have, right? That inherent power we have that's connected to the all. And whatever other name that people want to use, God, universe, creator, what have you.
Right.
That's a short definition. You know, Kel, I do want to say something. It's one of the things I've been learning about myself around vulnerability, because I used to pride myself a lot on being vulnerable. And I could sit down at a bar, at a coffee shop, and kind of really thinking I was being deep and revealing some stuff, right? But what I came to understand is that I was bullshitting a lot, right? Excuse my language, right? I wasn't being real. I wasn't being really transparent. And I'm coming to understand there's layers and layers of vulnerability, right? Because sometimes I haven't even known what I'm really feeling, right? But allowing myself to sit sometimes in discomfort, because one of the reasons why I drank, right? Because I would feel feelings that I didn't want to feel. And that was the quickest way to shut those down, right? Mm-hmm. But one of the things I'm learning now is to not have all the answers to things, be able to sit in what I'm feeling and trust myself enough to know not only can I work myself through this, but as I come out of whatever I'm feeling, that I'm going to pull in some lessons that's going to evolve me to the next level, right?
For sure.
And so as we talk about vulnerability, it's a constant growth, right? And a constant willingness to get naked again, to show up even more authentic, because we have so much more and more to give, and things, you know, as we talked about, that subconscious stuff, all the ego stuff to shed, right?
Right. Yeah, that's deep, man. I mean, there's even levels, because, you know, I feel like it's impossible, maybe not impossible, but very difficult to go from being, you know, a guarded individual, as I was for sure, and then jump to the other, but seeing the light of the benefit of being vulnerable and then opening up. I feel like it's a slow process, right? Like even if you can make that transition to being extremely guarded and not really talking about emotions or whatnot, and then seeing the light, quote unquote,
right?
Those levels of vulnerability fluctuate too, right? Like there's some times where there's some external factors to where you can feel like you're being vulnerable. You can feel like you're doing that. You may not even know what true vulnerability is for some time after you see the light, right? So there's levels, even myself, that I still get uncomfortable and kind of have to push myself in that direction of being vulnerable, being okay talking about, you know, my shortcomings and whatever I'm not able to do right now, and I'm working towards, right? But how do you educate not only Black individuals, but individuals of all shapes, sizes, and racial backgrounds in terms of stepping into their power and realizing their potential?
I think the first thing is we have to be honest where our life is right now, right? And is our life giving us everything that we want to experience right now? Understanding that each of us came here for two things. We came here with a divine purpose. So as we talk about us being infinite beings, we all came with a divine purpose. We also came here to experience all of ourselves. And so as we begin to ask the questions, is life giving us everything? Is our life giving us everything that we want to experience, right?
Right.
And if we can't answer that with an absolute yes, then we need to start to ask some critical questions to ourselves. What more do I have to give? What is going on within me that is blocking me from fully expressing and experiencing all that I want to experience, right? Those are the first things that we need to be able to do, right? And then be able to understand the truth that we are powerful. because there's been so many things. Our ego is designed in such a way to keep us from ever really believing that we are powerful, right? So now, Kel, if we go out and ask the average person on the street, if we went out, you know, started walking down a block interviewing people, do you feel powerful? The average person is going to say yes, right?
For sure.
But then if we went and spent a day or two and begin to look at their life, how are they relating to their intimate partner? How are they relating to their children? What kind of food are they putting into their body, right? Or even if we could strap on a tape recorder and capture their internal conversation, right?
Right.
Because the truth is, with most of us, if we put a tape recorder inside of our brains and recorded our self-conversation for 24 hours and then put that on Instagram Live, all of our friends would think we were insane, right?
Right.
Most of us, right? Because we end up having such negative self-talk and go against ourselves with our own language, right? So we have to begin to look at all that stuff and know that if we say that we are infinite beings, then we have infinite power. And so for all of us, me, you, everyone listening, all of us have so much more to give.
For sure.
So much more of ourselves to experience, right? And so just being able to do some of what I said, I mean, it's a long conversation.
How do you realize that without people feeling inadequate, right? How do you bridge that to where it's not that you are bad, quote unquote, for a lack of a better term, but that you just haven't reached your potential?
Right. It's about understanding that it's not about good or bad, but it's about being willing to grow. And as we understand our ego more, we'll understand only our egos would ever think we were inadequate, right?
Right.
So we have to begin to develop working understandings of what the ego is, because most of us have been either miseducated or undereducated about what the ego is, right? But only the ego would ever say we are inadequate, right?
For sure.
As we get more in touch with who we really are, that we would know that we are those infinite beings, and an infinite being can never be inadequate.
Exactly. Yeah, that's heavy, man. That's some heavy stuff. We getting broken into over there, man?
It's your ride, bro. It's your ride.
Hey, that sound like the wife. I got some extra sprinklers going on. Let me go see what's going on.
Okay.
No, that was a quick fix. How do you feel like these conversations have changed? You know, you're a local hoops coach and been a local hoops coach for a long time. How has your education on these topics changed the way that you see? Hold on, real quick. It's a story of our life with Kamani. He got some
comic relief, right?
Goodness gracious. Yeah. How do you with yourself being a local hoops coach, you know, for as long as you've been and seeing all types of different walks and ethnic backgrounds come through our doors, how do you feel like with your education that you've done on this topic, how have you seen yourself change your approach?
I think what's been important for me is to, you know, for my approach to coaching basketball has always been to use the game of basketball, game that we all love, as a vehicle to expose our kids to what's happening in our world, right? And to help them to develop a greater relationship to themselves. So using the game of basketball to expose kids to, again, exactly what I just said, right? So whether that's having kids come to trainings around racism, having conversations with our kids, right? Sure. Using the game to talk about all the things that we're talking about in terms of what does it mean to grow into a fully actualized human being, right? So and not just the kids, but also with the parents as well. And also just using the vehicle of basketball to create a family environment. And I think that's been the most rewarding thing for me. All the teams that I've coached, you know, arguably, you know, every team that I've coached, you know, when I see those kids, you know, 5-10 years later, right, you know, it's like, it's love, mad love, right? And it's been a family environment. And so just creating that brotherhood where we can go to a depth with each other, I think that's been most important for me.
Right.
And seeing the game as an opportunity to do something even bigger.
What do you feel is missing from an ego standpoint and this generation? How do you see this generation different than, yours and my generation.
Yeah.
In terms of the subject that we originally talked about, in terms of being comfortable with your emotions, do you feel like the younger generation, the quote unquote newer generation, are more comfortable than yours and my generation?
I think the greatest challenge for this generation is they have so many more distractions than we had, right?
Right.
And so your generation had more distractions than my generation, right?
Right.
I mean, you think about cell phones, Instagram, Facebook, just the amount of information that people are consuming right now. Our kids are bombarded with so much stuff that's designed to keep them from being in relationship with themselves, right? So that's the number one challenge, I think, for kids this day, is being able to unplug from the world a little bit and begin to develop a relationship with yourself, right? Because, because you could be playing video games all day, texting with a friend, FaceTiming with someone on a Zoom call, on Instagram, what's up? And I don't even know all the stuff that they're using right now, right? So there's just an overload of information and an overload of distractions. And these distractions, even, I know for me, one of the things, I kind of go back and forth with getting off of Facebook, because it's just an overload often of toxic energy, right?
For sure.
And, I find myself scrolling through, distracting myself. Then I get to a point like, this stuff doesn't serve me at all, right?
Exactly.
Right. And so that's the number one challenge I think young people are facing right now, is just the amount of distractions in the world.
Right. Right. For those people that, are not African-American men or women, how do you feel, what are some words of advice in terms of how you feel they can be of service, right? So you were having a great, with the recent events that we've had, and, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests and whatnot, you've had, from what I experienced and, what I can say, and since I've been alive, my adult life for sure, is this is the greatest kind of outreach locally that I've seen in terms of people from non-African-American descent reaching out to support African-Americans right now. But there's also a lot of confusion in terms of how do I support, right? So what is acceptable? I think they're, as much as they can, I think they can understand what we're feeling. But there's also kind of some gray area right there, right? Like, how much do I get involved? Do they not want me involved? How do I support without kind of, stepping over lines? It's a touchy subject that people don't really want to talk about right now. What advice would you be giving to people that genuinely want to help, but don't really know where to get started?
Yeah. So, Kel, what I would say is, yes, people should be caring about the impact of police brutality, police murder, all these systems on Black people.
Right.
But I think more importantly, people have to begin to look at what has been the impact on your humanity. Right. So one of the things we will often talk about, a lot of times people will talk about, say, white people being a white ally, for example. Right. So when you're an ally to someone else's struggle, it creates a certain dynamic where you're engaging only to the degree in which you want to keep engaging and to help someone else, right?
And you can pull out at any moment.
Pull out at any moment, right? And it also can create some paternalistic or maternalistic dynamics as well, right? But when you see that your humanity has been damaged by this stuff, right? Because you cannot be a part of a society that will lift you up and give you access and privilege and things like that, and then dehumanize someone else in the way, say, George Floyd was dehumanized, or countless other people that we don't even know their names are dehumanized every day. So there's an assault on your humanity. So I would think it's important for everybody to see, how does what is happening to Black people in this country impact my humanity? How, when I'm not actively standing to create something different than what exists today, then I am complicit with what is happening right now. Then what does that mean for me as a human being, right? And so it has to be much more than wanting to go help someone else, because, that can be the flavor, of the week, or, maybe you stay engaged for a month or two, then you go right back to what's been normal for you. But when you see this has resonance around your humanity and your life, then you're going to engage in a whole different way. And that's the conversation we've never really had in this country. So we've been and rightfully so, we've been focused on how this has damaged Black people and people of color. But we have not really looked at the spiritual, emotional, mental, economic, social damage this has done to white people. Right. And so that ought to be the work that most white people are doing right now, is asking themselves the question, what does it even mean to be white in the United States of America, right? Because that is not a normal human classification. That's a socio-political classification. And then what does it mean to be a part of a collective that is connected to a lineage of so much ugliness and so much pain, and pain that is playing out and being perpetuated today?
Right, 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 man. I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate that for sure. I know there's a lot of other stuff, and you know, if you had anything else you want to add, for sure, let me know. But I know there's a lot of other subjects that you know we can go down this lane in terms of discussing how intricate each of these different questions that we have, you know, we presented today, and we really want to just kind of get the ball rolling and continue to follow up on some subjects as well, and some things that we're going to kind of look to create education behind these subjects. So I appreciate you giving your insight big time, man.
I appreciate you having me, man. I love you.
Of course. Love you too, brother.
Okay.
So anybody, you know, who didn't get their question answered, feel free to message myself or Dustin. You know, we try to do our best that we can. The reason why we're having this on the Local Hoops platform is that Local Hoops is and has always prided themselves in terms of being more than basketball. All of our coaches, all of our assistants, all of our volunteers, they will all get the similar message that, you know, basketball competitively will leave you at some point. And there's a lot of life lessons and tools that you can grab from the game of basketball, depending on the coaches you have and their philosophies that, you know, can impact and shape the ways that of the young men and women that we turn out to be. And that's why I feel that, you know, yes, but we're all coming together, you know, from a local hoop standpoint in terms of, you know, the common denominator is basketball, but we're looking to push the narrative that the common denominator should be youth development through the game of basketball, right? So youth development taking the priority over winning basketball games, making a certain team, playing under a certain coach, winning certain accolades, but making it more about, you know, learning and trusting the philosophy of the program, and also, you know, the philosophy of your coaches, and listening to why they feel a certain way, and kind of how they approach each athlete individually. Yeah. But I appreciate that, my man. I appreciate you for everything that you give to Local Hoops and just to the community around. You've been an amazing blessing to me and my kids and my family. We support you 100% as you've been supporting us through all these years.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're going to have to get on for a part 2, man.
Part 2.
For sure.
All right, bro. I'm going to get out the garage now.
All right, brother.
Peace.
Later.